All right, thank you, Nancy. So, like Nancy mentioned, we're talking about managing common squash and pumpkin pests. We'll also throw in some cucumber pests, so cucurbit pests, more or less what we're going to talk about today. And again, this is common ones. We're not going to talk about all of them, but the ones we typically encounter in our home landscapes. So, a little background here. What are cucurbits? So, these are plants in the family Cucurbitaceae, contains over 100 genera, 700 species. When it comes to our garden plants, these are things going to be like cucumbers, melons, squash, pumpkins, things along those lines. Traditionally, these plants are going to take up quite a bit of space. These are large vining plants for the most part. However, in recent years, we're seeing more dwarf and bush type plants available in the trade for home gardeners and stuff, especially people who have limited space. Some of these may be even able to grow in a large pot, have them trail out of there. So they're not just these large, monstrous plants that eat your garden anymore. There are more and more types that will fit into smaller spaces. For general care for our cucurbits, again, these are tender, warm season vegetables, so they like warm temperatures. They're going to grow best when day and night temperatures are above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So here in central Illinois, mid-May is typically when we're going to start planting these into June and July. There is really kind of the tail end because these do have fairly long growing season, days to harvest for a lot of these. So we need adequate time for those to be able to develop fruit for some of these, size up so we can pick them and stuff. They like full sun conditions, due west and well-drained soil. They don't necessarily like having wet feet. So there's some things to keep in mind. If we're not growing them in adequate or the conditions that they want, it can lead to problems for us with pests and diseases potentially. So when it comes to pest management in our gardens for cucurbits and just really in general, when it comes to pest management in our landscapes and gardens, we want to try to practice integrated pest management or IPM. And this is going to be a comprehensive approach to controlling pests, whether that be insects, pathogens, weeds, animals, what have you, with environmentally and economically sound practices. So as an example, with insects, we'll have our population of insects. We'll use our IPM techniques to get those down to a lower level where they are not causing noticeable or significant damage to our plants. A lot of times we're not necessarily completely eliminating the pests because that's going to get away from those environmentally and economically sound practices. We are trying to get them down to a place where, again, they are not causing noticeable damage or they are not causing damage that's going to reduce the yield to our crops in the case of vegetables. So when it comes to managing pests, the first thing we need to do is scouting. Scouting is going to be one of the most important things we're going to do, and is probably the most overlooked part of pest management. Actually going out into your garden, into your landscape, and looking at your plants and seeing what's going on out there. This can be visual inspections, so going out, ideally at least once a week, walking out through your plants, through your, in this case, cucurbit plants, turning over leaves. Are you noticing any leaf spots? Are plants stunted? Are they wilting? Do you see insects on them? The sooner we find an issue going on in our plants, the sooner we can do something about it, and the more likely we are to be successful in managing that particular problem. The longer we wait, a lot of times it makes it more difficult to get that problem managed satisfactorily. So, we're walking out in our plants, we see something that's abnormal, and we want to look at that and try to figure out what is causing the problem. So here we've got two pictures here on the slide. Um, if we're doing this in person, I'd ask you to raise your hand and ask and think what the problems are here. But on the left there, we have frost damage. There's nothing we can do about this. You can spray every chemical in the world on there. The plants are going to recover from that. That is, in this case, they probably early frost in the fall came through and nipped those plants. There's nothing you can do about that. On the right, downy mildew. This is a pathogen, not terribly common in Illinois most years, but this is something we can actually do some things about to try to manage. Again, they have similar symptoms. Our leaves are curling up, they're discolored, but we want to make sure we're actually identifying what that problem is so we can take the appropriate management steps to try to manage them, if we can even do that. So when it comes to managing pests in our landscape, four different techniques we're going to use in an IPM program or integrated pest management program. First is going to be cultural. So this, we're trying to maintain the health of the plants. So this is where we're getting into the right plant, the right place at the right time. So in the case of our cucurbits, not putting these out too early so they are not getting hit by late frosts, or if the soils really haven't warmed up, those plants are just going to kind of sit there. They're not going to grow much until those soils really start warming up. And the longer they sit there in that seedling stage, the more the greater the chance that something's going to come in and attack them because they're not growing all that much. Again, looking at proper fertility, soil testing to make sure we have proper nutrient and pH levels in our soils, looking at resistant cultivars, particularly for diseases, but some insects. When we get into that, there are certain types of cucurbits that are more resistant to certain insects than others. So if you have issues with a particular pest or disease year in, year out, you may want to look at finding a resistant cultivar to that problem. Crop rotation, we grow the same crop, we grow cucurbits in the same spot every year. That's going to encourage the buildup of pathogens and pests in that area. So trying to rotate that throughout the garden to avoid that buildup. I realize that's easier said than done in a residential landscape setting. A lot of times we have limited space, but try to grow them as far away as possible from where your previous field did, or it may be taking a break for a year, break that disease cycle, those insect cycles, take a year off. Hopefully those reduce, and then you can resume growing the following year. Good sanitation. So end of the year cleaning up the garden, getting rid of disease plant material, eliminating hiding spots, things like that. Mulching can help with weed pressure, help retain soil moisture, things like that. And again, water use, watering when we need to. In the case of cucurbits, they're going to need a lot of water, especially as they are developing their fruit. There's a lot of water in our pumpkins, our squash, our cucumbers, all of that. So they're going to need a lot of water for those fruit to properly form. So keeping an eye on rain levels, irrigating if we need to. Second, crop rotation, mentioned this already, but again, planting the same crops in the same location every year encourages the buildup of these diseases and pests. So again, like this picture shows, we've got these different groups of plants, so solanaceous, peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes. Those are all related to each other. They share the same pests, diseases, just like cucurbits do. So again, rotating those around the garden the best we can, or again, taking a break for a year if we need to, if those pests and disease populations get to the point where it's getting really difficult to manage them, take a year off, hopefully break that cycle. Susceptibility to diseases or pests sometimes too. Um, so plants are going to vary, the cultivars or even the species of plant is going to vary in how susceptible they are to being attacked by a pathogen or by an insect. So if it's susceptible, if that disease is present and the right conditions, that plant is probably going to be infected by that particular pathogen. If it's tolerant, it can endure that. It's still going to get infected probably, but it's not affected nearly as bad as a susceptible type. If it's resistant, it's much more difficult, I guess, for you could say for that disease to infect that plant. It still may get infected, but again, the symptoms aren't nearly as bad as what they would be in a tolerant or susceptible cultivar. And then there are some that are immune. They're not going to be infected by a pathogen. They're not going to be attacked by a particular type of insect. So, looking for those resistant or tolerant varieties, it can be helpful in trying to manage our pests and diseases in our landscapes. Physical and mechanical, we're trying to physically eliminate pests. So again, we're talking about cucurbits here. We can put on netting, row cover over our plants early in the season. Once they start to bloom, we'll have to take those off, but that can help keep insects off those plants early in the season. Cultivating, not only for weeds, but sometimes insects are going to overwinter in the soil, so we can cultivate that soil, try to kill those insects that may be overwintering or have overwintered in the soil. Hand removing pests off of plants. If we have disease parts on our plants, removing those so that does not spread to other plants, or removing the entire plant. So again, so that pathogen does not spread throughout our healthy plants, so on and so forth. We have biological, so we're trying to manage pests with natural enemies. So these could be things like predators. So our lady beetles on the bottom right there, both the larvae and the adults will feed on small, soft-bodied insects like aphids, whiteflies. There's even a species that will feed on powdery mildew. So they have a fairly wide diet there, depending on the species. In the middle left, We have aphid lions. These are the larvae of a lacewing, again, feeding on aphids, other small, soft-bodied insects. We have parasites and parasitoids. So on the top right there, there's a parasitoid wasp laying an egg inside of an aphid. Egg will hatch. It's going to eat the inside of the aphid. Eventually, a wasp will emerge from there. So again, it's managing these pests for us. Below that, this is a hornworm, so more of a tomato example here, but all those white things are the cocoons of a wasp that were inside that caterpillar eating it, and they've now come out, spun a cocoon, and again, they will go out and attack other caterpillars in the environment. And then we have pathogens. So top left, all that white stuff on that caterpillar, that's a fungus that's infected it. So not only do plants and humans have pathogens that attack them, insects will as well. And so just because you see an insect on a plant does not necessarily mean it's going to be a problem or something we need to manage. So again, proper identification is going to be important to make sure we're not eliminating these natural enemies in our landscape. They may be controlling the pests already. We just need to give them a little bit of time sometimes. So when it comes to conserving natural enemies and pollinators as well, so pollinators are going to be important for our cucurbit plants. We want to provide pollen and nectar resources for these natural enemies. A lot of them, as in the adult stage, feed on pollen and nectar, either exclusively in the case of like wasps and stuff, or lady beetles will supplement their diet with pollen, especially early in the year before pest populations build up that they feed on. So plants that produce small open flowers with exposed nectaries are going to be attracted to them. Again, these are usually pretty small insects, so they need to be able to easily access that stuff. Things in the carrot family, aster, mustard, pea and bee families are very attractive to them. So like carrot family, if you have grow carrots, um, fennel, things like that, sometimes those plants will bolt. In my garden, I just leave those, let those flower, let those natural enemies feed on that stuff. Same thing with a lot of our herbs. Usually, we want to cut those flowers off because when the plants start producing flowers, those oils in the plant, those levels are reduced. That's what gives us the aroma and the flavor. But I'll leave a plant or two, let those flower. Again, those flowers are small, very attractive to a lot of these natural enemies as well. Providing shelter of areas to overwinter, brush piles, things like that, and rethinking the use of our pesticides, particularly insecticides. They are formulated to kill insects. These natural enemies are also insects, so a lot of these insecticides that we use in the landscape will adversely affect them as well. And then finally, last strategy we can use is our chemicals. So we're using pesticides to manage our pests, whether those be fungicides for fungal diseases, insecticides for insects, herbicides for plants, what have you. So when it comes to chemicals, we really won't use only when needed. We want to get away from that kind of spray and pray approach. We see a problem, we spray it. Again, if we're using IPM, we're identifying that stuff. We're trying to use these other techniques first a lot of times before we reach for the bottle of pesticide and use it. Sometimes pesticides will be the best option to control pests, but in a lot of cases, there's other things we can do before we start spraying them. Again, using selective products that are, if they are available, these are going to potentially have less of an effect on our natural enemies, our pollinators, things like that. We only want to use as much as the label allows. More does not equal better. So read that label. It's going to tell you how much you can use, what kind of plants you can use it on, so on and so forth. And if possible, we want to rotate chemicals. If we use the same chemical over and over and over again, we increase the chance of resistance building up in those pest populations. So if possible, try to rotate the active ingredient, the mode of action for the chemicals we're using. I just remember that if we are using pesticides, that the label is the law, the label is a legal document. We're going to make sure we're reading and following all label directions. It's going to tell you how much to apply, how often you can apply it, what plants you can apply it to. And in our case, since we're talking about cucurbits, plants we're going to be eating, we need to pay attention to that pre-harvest interval. So it's going to say you need to wait X amount of days before you can harvest this crop after applying the pesticide. So make sure you are following that. That's going to vary depending on the crop. So maybe 7 days for green beans, for example, and it could be 2 weeks for cucurbits. So it's not necessarily the same for each vegetable crop you're going to be applying it to. So just make sure you're reading the label, following those pre-harvest intervals, since we're going to be eating this stuff potentially. All right, so getting into some of the problems we often see in cucurbits. So one we often hear about is pollination problems. So cucurbits produce separate male and female flowers. Typically, the plants will produce male flowers first. So when they first start producing flowers, the majority of them, if not all of them, are going to be male flowers. And then over time, they will start developing female flowers. So in the pictures there on the right, we have a female flower. You can see that swollen area at the base of the flower. It basically looks like a miniature version of whatever cucurbit we're growing. In this case, this is a squash. Uh, Cucumbers, the base of that looks like a miniature cucumber. On the left, those are the male flowers. It has that straight stalk. It doesn't have that swelling there, the ovary part of the flower. Female flowers are only open for a day. So if we have crummy weather, that could impact pollination. A lot of times we are relying on honeybees for pollination. And if it's cool, it's cloudy, overcast, rainy like today, they're not going to be out flying. So they may not, those female flowers may not get pollinated, and those plants will abort those flowers. If we have really humid conditions, that can create sticky pollen. It's not going to transfer as well either. So weather can play an important role in how well our pollinator or how well our cucurbits are being pollinated. And like I mentioned, un unfertilized, poorly fertilized flowers a lot of times are going to be aborted and fall off the plant. All right, so for the pests, squash bugs. This is probably the one, um, at least here in my office, that we hear the most about is going to be squash bugs. These are primarily a pest on squash and pumpkins. So on the top there, we have the eggs, and they are kind of a brick red, brownish color. A lot of times they are laid on the underside of the leaves, in the crotches where the veins meet, but they can be on the upper surface of the leaves. They can be on the stems. Really, they'll lay them anywhere, but mostly we find them on the leaves. When those eggs hatch, the nymphs will come out when they first emerge. Those first instar nymphs, they are green with black legs. And as they get older, in the middle picture there, they will turn this grayish color. And then the adults, in the bottom picture, about 5/8 of an inch long, this brownish black appearance to them. Both the nymphs and the adults are going to feed on our cucurbit plants. They'll feed on the leaves, the stems, the fruit of that stuff. And they have straw-like mouth parts. So they're going to stick these into the leaf tissues, plant tissues, and they're going to suck out the contents of those leaves. So in the middle picture there, you can see all those little yellowish spots, the stippling. Those are areas where those squash bugs have fed. If you get a lot of feeding in there, you start to get these larger brown areas, like in the middle there, from this feeding damage. Going to dry up, like that picture there. And here, top picture, you can see this is late in the year. The vines have kind of died back. All of the squash bugs have moved to this pumpkin. And in this case, this was my garden. You push that, it was just basically shriveled up. They'd sucked so much of the liquid out of there. It was starting to shrivel up. So when it comes to managing these, there's several different things we can do here. So hand picking eggs. So the bottom picture there, you can see that clump of eggs right there. You can just smash those on leaf itself. If you don't want to smash them, that dotted line there, you can just tear off part of that leaf. Don't just throw those eggs on the ground because they will hatch and crawl onto your plant, but you want to dispose of those, put them in the yard waste, get them out of the area some way. Well, again, we want to remove debris in the fall, so garden cleanup is going to be important. If we have issues with these, they're going to overwinter in plant material, maybe in weeds and mulch, things like that. So doing a good job of removing that stuff, removing those overwintering areas can help reduce those populations. During the growing season, we can lay down boards in the garden. A lot of times they will go under those during the day and stuff, or at night, and then you can remove those boards and dispose of those squash bugs however you want. Smash them, spray them, but you're drawing them into that area to dispose of them. One of the drawbacks of using mulch potentially in cucurbits is with squash bugs. They like that. So if you have mulch and you have a lot of squash bug problems, you may need to remove that mulch or start pulling that back to reduce those hiding areas that they have in your garden. When it comes to chemicals, we want to start treating when eggs first begin to hatch. This is usually between mid-June, mid-July. It's going to depend on the year and where you're at in the state. And the younger they are, the easier they are to manage. Once squash bugs become adults, the chemicals we can get as homeowners are not very effective. So this is one where you need to find them early and get on top of it because once they get big, it gets incredibly difficult, borderline impossible to control them with chemicals that we can get as homeowners without a license. So things like bifenthrin, cyfluthrin, permethrin, spinosad are some of the active ingredients we'd want to look for when if we're going to be using chemicals to manage these. And again, if we're spraying these or really any insecticides for our cucurbits, especially when they are in flower, we probably want to be applying these in the evening, so we have less bee activity then, or we want to go through and remove all of the flowers on those plants so we don't have pollinators coming into those plants when we're spraying them. Cucumber beetles is another fairly common pest we have in our cucurbits. These are going to attack cucumbers, squash, and melons primarily. The larvae are going to eat the roots and they'll burrow into the young plant stems. So the top picture on the left there, you can see all that pitting and stuff. That is feeding damage from cucumber beetles. The adults are also going to feed on the plants. The seedlings, you can see on the bottom left there, the cotyledons, all that, again, all that pitting is feeding damage from the adults feeding on that. Leaf damage on the bottom right there. They also feed on the flowers and then the fruit on the top right there as well. We have two different species here in Illinois that we commonly see. We have the striped cucumber beetle. Again, you can see it on the top picture there. And then the spotted cucumber beetle, which is also called southern corn rootworm, depending on what plant it's feeding. So it's going to feed on our cucurbits. It'll also feed on beans and corn as well. Striped cucumber beetles are going to overwinter in protected areas here in Illinois. They start emerging mid-April to early June, again, depending on the year and where you are in the state. Spotted cucumber beetle is not overwinter in Illinois. They move up from southern states throughout the year. And it just kind of depends on the year when they start showing up. So they can cause damage from their feeding, but the really big problem that they can cause is they will transmit bacterial wilt to plants. And we'll talk about that after this slide. So when it comes to managing our cucumber beetles, again, putting on row covers, keep them off those plants early in the year, but we will have to remove those once our plants start to bloom so they can be pollinated. So this is just kind of a temporary solution to keeping them off. And then again, if we have lots of them, or we have issues with them, or you're concerned about bacterial wilt, we can apply pesticides when we start seeing those beetles appearing in the landscape. And again, applying those later in the day when the plants are blooming or going in and removing those flowers so our pollinators aren't going to be affected by those applications. So bacterial wilts, again, can be a serious problem in melons and cucumbers. Not as big of a problem in squash and pumpkins, fortunately. So with this, we have individual runners or whole plants begin to wilt and die. So usually when this first shows up, leaves kind of a dull green, they'll wilt during the day and recover at night. So basically this bacteria is building up in the basically the tubing, the xylem, the phloem of the plant. It's clogging that up so water can't get in there. So they start wilting during the day. And as it cools off, those plants will recover. And this will kind of go on for a while. Eventually, they'll remain permanently wilted. They'll turn yellow and brown along the margins, and then basically completely wither and die because the flow of water has been completely cut off in that plant, and they don't recover anymore. So here, if you have a plant that's wilting during the day and recovering, one thing you can do is cut those stems, rub them together, and slowly pull them apart. Depending how good of a screen you're looking at, you can kind of see those little strands coming between those two cut ends. A little easier picture here, or you cut the stems, put them in water, and you can see all that milky white stuff that's streaming. That's the bacteria coming out of that plant. So if you have those strings when you rub the ends together, pull them apart, or put them in water, the streaming, that's an indication you've got bacterial wilt. So the cucumber beetles are going to carry this bacteria in their mouth parts. So we want to remove and destroy infected plants so that the other cucumber beetles aren't feeding on it, basically, and then carrying that to healthy plants. We want to get that out of our landscape as soon as we possibly can. And managing cucumber beetles is going to be the primary control method for this. Again, this doesn't show up all the time, but if you start seeing wilting plants, then you probably want to, again, make sure you've got bacterial built. And then we probably want to start spraying for those cucumber beetles if you have multiple cucurbits that could potentially be infected by it. Squash vine borer. So back to the insects here. So squash and pumpkins are going to be the most susceptible. Cucumbers and melons can be attacked, but much less frequently. Primarily, this is a problem of squash and pumpkins, at least that we see. So the larvae are going to, um, the eggs are going to be laid at near the base of the plant by the adults. The adult is the bottom picture there. It's colorful. It's a moth. Resembles a wasp, but this is actually a day flying moth, about 5/8 of an inch long, orange and black. And they're going to emerge late June to early July. So the female is going to lay an egg near the base of the plant. The egg is going to hatch. The caterpillar is going to bore into the stem and begin feeding. So this top picture here, um, this is from this plant right here. So it's collapsed. Cut that open, and there's the caterpillar feeding on it. So basically, from the point where they get in there on, that plant will start wilting. Usually get some rot in that area as well. As they're feeding, you may see a bunch of kind of like wet sawdust near the base there. That's the frass or the droppings, the poop, whatever you want to call it, from that caterpillar being pushed out of the hole a lot of times. So if you see that, that's an indication you have got squash vine borers in those plants. So when it comes to management here, so again, crop rotation, these will overwinter in the soil. So again, again, realize it's easier said than done in home landscapes. You only have so much room, but get them further away, take a year off, again, break that cycle potentially. We can cover plants again with row covers until blooming starts. Now, if you're growing your squash and your pumpkins in the same place every year, and those squash vine borers are overwintering in the soil, and you put a row cover on there, you've then trapped them in there. So you're going to use this in conjunction with crop rotation, so you're not trapping those under your netting. We can plant a second crop or delay our plantings until July, because by the time those plants really start vining, where the vine borers will lay eggs on them, they'll be done for the year. Drawback to that, though, is again, if we have some of these varieties that take a long time to develop, our pumpkins and squash, especially our winter melons, we're letting them fully develop before we pick them. If we get an early frost, we may run into a time issue there. So that's the drawback potentially of trying that. We're shortening our growing season if we delay that planting, but that is a way we can try to avoid issues with them. Some varieties are going to be more tolerant than others. So Blue Hubbard, um, that's one, if you whisper squash vine borer to it, it's going to be affected. It is extremely susceptible to squash vine borer. But things like butternut squash, kashaw, some of the crooknecks are fairly tolerant to squash vine borer damage. So again, if you consistently have problems with it, looking at some of those that may be more tolerant to squash vine borers. Again, overwinter in the soil, so we can till the soil, try to just, kill those pupa that may be in the soil as well. We can also, quote unquote, surgically remove the larvae. So if you notice them early enough, you can make a slit in that stem, find that caterpillar, remove it, kill it however you want. Then we can kind of close that back up and bury that part of the vine in the ground. Hopefully that will induce that plant to start sending out roots from that area. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's worth a shot. And again, if you do have a plant that's completely collapsed, pull that plant out of there so that caterpillar is not coming out and pupating in the soil and causing problems for you next year. We can use chemicals as well. So we're looking at weekly applications to the crowns, again, the base of that plant, and runners when the plants begin to vine, when they start to run. So again, usually cucurbits, they'll grow for a bit, and then they'll start growing their vines really long. That's when they're going to be, the vine borers are going to lay their eggs on those plants. So again, applying late in the day so we're not affecting our pollinators. Whiteflies is another one. Usually shows up a little bit later in the year. Typically, we find these on the undersides of the leaves. The body and the wings of the adults are covered in a white powdery wax. Thus the name. So you can see them in the picture here. And a lot of times, if you're walking through plants, you disturb them, you kind of get this cloud of white stuff flying around. It's a pretty good indication you've got whiteflies in your plants. Again, they have these piercing, sucking mouth parts. So they can cause mottling and yellowing of the leaves when they get in there. A lot of times they don't get to a population where it's high enough where they're causing significant damage, or a lot of times they're coming a little bit later in the year where the plants are big enough and they can kind of withstand some of this damage they're causing. Some ways we can manage them. So non-chemical, you can use a forceful water, a spray of water to knock them off the plants. Do this a couple times, get those populations down. Put yellow sticky traps out near those infested foliage, and basically attract the adults that they'll get stuck to it and die. And again, if populations get really high and you're concerned about them, we can use chemicals as well. Insecticidal soap, pyrethrin. There's some imidacloprid formulations that you can use on vegetable crops as well. Um, Looking for those active ingredients potentially. Squash beetles. This is not necessarily a common one, but I had these in my garden a couple years ago, and I have lots of pictures of them, so I threw them in this presentation. So the adults, these are actually a type of lady beetle. So not all lady beetles are good. There are a couple species, squash beetles, Mexican bean beetle would be two examples of lady beetles that actually feed on plants, not insects. But the adults are yellow or orange with black spots. So you can see that on the bottom picture there. The larvae are yellow and they're covered in these little black spines. And that's the top picture there. Uh, Larvae are feeding on the underside of the leaves. And when they feed, you can see in this top picture here, we'll kind of cut a circle. That's going to cut off, kind of sever the veins. That's going to prevent the flow of cucurbitacin into those plants, which is kind of a chemical the plants are using to protect themselves. So they'll cut this little circle there, sever those vines to reduce the flow of that. Um, and then as they're feeding, they'll skeletonize both the adults and the larvae. So again, you can see that in the bottom picture there where they've eaten around, eaten the tissues in between the veins there. So when it comes to managing these, again, row covers until the plants bloom, then we need to remove those. We can hand pick the adults and the larvae off of the plants. And then removing plant debris after harvest, they're going to overwinter in that. So reducing those hiding places for them can help reduce those populations as well. And again, with chemical populations rarely get high enough that they're going to cause enough damage to warrant the use of pesticides. So we don't really recommend them pesticides for them because more than likely the populations are not going to get high enough. They're more of a curiosity than anything else. And then last thing we have here, powdery mildew. So this is another one that's showing up usually a little bit later in the season. This is white powdery growth on both the upper and lower leaf surfaces. So you can see in the picture here, these little white spots on those squash leaves. As the disease progresses over time, those spots get bigger. They may coalesce, grow into one another, and you can get large areas of the leaf surface or the entire leaf being affected by that. And then eventually that leaf will die. Um, High temperatures, high humidity is what this pathogen likes. Um, Oops. Oh, so there's an example of kind of as it progresses, they're kind of growing together and getting these large areas here. So this is powdery mildews are kind of unique in that they don't necessarily need moisture on the leaves in order to infect plants. A lot of our pathogens, they have to have water in the leaves in order to infect them. That's not the case with powdery mildew. Again, they like that really high humid conditions um, for the disease development. So for management, a lot of this is going to be good plant spacing so we can get airflow through there, help reduce the humidity so that canopy is not holding that humidity in there. Um, Again, we can start spraying with fungicides as the first sign of disease. And a lot of times this is a little bit later in the year, not as big of a concern sometimes, but there are some times where it gets bad enough where you may need to. The problem with fungicides though is it was once the plants are infected, you can't cure the parts that are infected. Basically, you're putting that fungicide down to protect the rest of the plants. So if you're going to spray, make sure you're spraying it early and before the disease kind of gets widespread. And there are resistant varieties and cultivars out there. Saying if you have consistent issues with powdery mildew, that may be something you want to look at. Again, cleaning up plant debris, so it's not overwintering in that plant debris as well. Getting rid of that inoculum, getting that out of your landscape, help reduce the chances of that infecting your plants as well. So that's all I've got for this one. So, like Nancy mentioned, this is being recorded, and all of our four seasons have been recorded, and they are on our University of Illinois Extension Horticulture YouTube page. So you can find that at go.illinois.edu/four seasons recordings. And then we do have a survey for this presentation. So if you're not watching on this phone, or if you're not watching this on your phone, you can scan that QR code. It'll take you there, or go to go.illinois.edu/squash-pests. Um, Let us know how this was. If it was good, if it was bad, ideas for future presentations, what have you. We do read them and do adjust accordingly. And with that, take questions. That's what I look like if you're curious. And if you have any questions later down the road, there's my email. You're free to email me as well.